Who's ready to win the day in sports? I know you are. Welcome to Fantasy Sports Daily, powered by FantasyGuru.com, Monday through Friday, noon to 1 p.m. Eastern. I'm Justin Fensterman, and let's break everything down from a fantasy sports perspective. What is going on, everybody? My name is Justin Fensterman, and welcome to Fantasy Sports Daily here on the Elite Plus Network, powered by FantasyGuru.com. Every single Wednesday, I get to hang out with you guys, giving Mr. Ray Flowers a bit of a break ski, although I'm sure Ray's doing a bunch of other stuff, and if not, he'll probably IM me and tell me, I don't have a break, I don't have a day off, I've got this, I've got that, I've got the Elite Sports Show with Jeff Mans, as he does every single Wednesday, 3 to 6 p.m. Eastern. Listen to the man Zito and Pappy all week long on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio. Going to be a fun day here, a little bit of a different kind of day, because going to be talking some football, but also going to be talking some basketball as well. The season is less than a week away. We start out with just a 2-game slate next Tuesday, well, this upcoming Tuesday, technically. But then after that, we've got a big old monster Wednesday slate, and that's when the real fun for DFS begins. So we're going to talk some NBA also with Chris Rose. He's going to stop by the program today because at this point with Rich Mileto, the fantasy Bosco, he needed to step aside for the day. So I'm bringing in Chris Rose because we're going to talk a little bit more than streaming, but GPP strategy for both DFS NFL and DFS NBA. We talk a lot of cash games. Kind of like Jeff Mans, I'm more of a cash game player. I'm mainly a cash game player. But in the NBA, especially when you've got those 3-game slates, those 4-game slates, even those 5-game slates, but really those 3 and 4-game slates, which we will have a few times a week, that's when you got to think of it more as a GPP player than a cash game player. So here's everything that's going on today. We're going to talk some injuries, as you know, for FantasyGuru.com, besides doing the NBA work that I'm doing, and also cover the practice reports as well. So with the practice reports, I'm, as always, going to have them this afternoon. So make sure you check in. But I urge you guys especially to also remember that I kind of do 2 pass-throughs for the practice reports, and especially the injury reports. But the practice reports is my content for those that have been following me a long time at FSD Sports on X and Instagram. And it's great to see everyone. Doug, what's going on? Sean, good to see you as well. Always having a good time when the Elite Mafia stops by right here. Hey, this is a free show. That is why we put it out there, so we could give you all as much content as humanly possible. So with the practice reports, I hand them in at a certain time, but a lot of the West Coast games that have the teams featured out there on a weekly basis don't always come out by the time the deadline rolls around. And I'm when it comes to that deadline, very sensitive to it, because I want you all to be able to get the information as quick as possible. It's not just a list. On the defensive side, I'll admit, it's more of a list. On the offensive side, it's fantasy impact. Not as much in the first practice report on Wednesday, but by the time we start to realize that this player might actually be out, then what I do is I start writing in the fantasy impact. And of course, for the injury report that comes out every single Friday, I will have all the fantasy impact of all offensive players that are out or questionable, and that'll be added along with the defensive players that are questionable or out or in at the bottom as well. So Wednesday, Thursday, practice reports, Friday, the injury report. And that's really where we start right here, because when looking at some of the injuries here, look at Thursday Night Football, because the Saints at this point are coming into this game very, very hurt. Even on a minor basis, too. I mean, Taysom Hill with the fractured ribs. I mean, he's practicing on a limited basis, but what's that going to bring? He's a questionable. Kamara should play dealing with a hand injury, but he should play despite being limited. Derek Carr is not going to play. Rashid Shaheed is the big one, because a report came out, I think it was yesterday, if not Monday. Everything kind of blends together. And I saw that Rashid Shaheed, who I was actually very big into as a value option, thinking that he'd be your deep threat guy. And he's been a little bit more than that, but the quarterback issue, and then Shaheed scoring a touchdown on special teams. And this is where you really need to know your league rules, because there are some of my leagues that counted it, and then there are other leagues that don't count it. So you have to know your league rules there. So I have a lot of Rashid Shaheed, probably more than I really ever need. But hey, if there's a highly targeted receiver, that's what I'm going for. One of my biggest things with fantasy football this year that I'm trying to change is I'm not trying to be as married to players that I drafted that haven't been coming through. Players that are hurt that, hey, even if they come back in, are they really going to make an impact? There have been a few leagues where I've actually had to cut Zamir White because now we're into bye weeks and everything. And I would sweat that out a lot. Oh, cut a running back. I don't want to do that. What does the future hold for him? We don't know what the hell the future holds for him. But I'll say this, with what we had seen from Zamir White, and I talk about this every single week, he sucked. So that's why for me, even though I'm dropping a back, as long as you have the depth, then you could be comfortable to make the drop. And you don't need 5, 6, 7 at that point. If you have a good 3 or 4 that are getting volume at this point and will still get that volume, even if the game flow doesn't match, that's fine. They're not always going to get volume. We will have even our stud running backs at times get maybe 9 to 11 carries, and that's it when we want 15 plus. But when you're in that position where you've got a player that just continues to not prove himself, a player that when he's in, that it seems like he's not doing anything except running up the middle, and that's it. Alexander Madison taking touchdowns away from him. That's why for me with a Zamir White, where in years past I'd hold and hold and hold, and this time not doing that. And I'll say this, Matt, even saying this, he did it a couple of weeks ago, and I would have as well back then, because from what we saw, and this was someone that I wanted to make sure I had at least 2 or 3 shares of very fair fantasy value. I actually thought he was going to be one of the values of the year after what we saw at the end of last year. And yikes, it's been the complete opposite there. So make sure that you're keeping in mind too, because the report circling all the way back that I saw was that this knee injury could be that he picked up late in the game, Rashid Shaheed, could be worse than originally is. Now, I see that report 2 days ago, and as someone who does the practice reports for Fantasy Guru, I'm constantly looking at multiple sources just to see if I'm seeing the same thing. Kind of weird at this point. We haven't found out he's going to miss time because of the knee. If there were reports suggesting that this injury could have a missed time, we haven't really heard too much about that. So stay tuned for that, because that's a situation where we don't know when we're going to see Derek Carr again. We don't know when Rashid Shaheed will play. So that's why for me, I just want to be careful. And if that means at times, because I need a fill-in, you might have to drop him in a league with deep benches, let's just say, then yeah, maybe you drop him and you find another highly targeted receiver. That's something that you have to do. Again, not being too married to these guys. We need players that are going to help us now. We need players that have those ceilings. And that's why for me, trying to change things. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why with a few of my teams that were 0-3 to start, I actually managed to win a couple of games. One league I'm 3-3 now, another league I'm 2-4. And because of those waiver wire pickups where I didn't want to hold and hold and hold, it made my team better. We got to think short term in a decent amount of situations here. Hal, what's going on? Good afternoon to you. I had a look. Is it the afternoon? Yes, it is. Other situations that we're going to be watching out for here for week number 7. Anthony Richardson. I mean, we're all being teased regarding this guy. It's just been just when we think we're back, out again. So we're hearing the reports that he should be able to practice without restriction. For me, I'll believe it when I see it. For those that are dealing with Richardson and are stuck in that gray area right now in Anthony Richardson purgatory, like we all are, trust me, I never, ever, ever want to misguide anybody out there and say, well, I mean, yeah, I fully practiced, but let's wait and see. I would still be prepared anyway when it comes to the Colts situations, not only with Anthony Richardson, but their run game too, because I'm someone that has Jonathan Taylor in a few places, but I also, because this is what we do when you ride with Jeff Manson, the Elite Mafia, we handcuff, which is so important. And Trey Sermon is getting the volume, but now he's dealing with a shoulder injury. So I was already nervous about this because, A, we don't know if Taylor's going to play or not just yet. But Sermon, if he's not going to fall into the end zone, I mean, that's something that started to make me worried. And even more than that, because it is bye weeks. So Tyler Goodson is someone who's been running the ball very well over his last few weeks. Has he gotten double-digit carries? He has not. Has he rushed for over 5 yards per carry in both of his last 2 matchups? Yes. Yes, he has. So for me, when it comes down to who to put in, now you're in a situation where if you have that situation, and yes, Sean, I totally agree with you that he's really not that good. Tracer, let me leave that up for a little bit. We're clearly seeing it. And it just shows that just because he's the next man up does not mean he's going to be an effective multi-week producer. At that point, I'm hoping in a PPR to get 10 to 12 points. I don't get that. Turns me off. Tyler Goodson, though, running the ball like he is and also being targeted in the passing attack as well. That's something I'm interested in. That's something that if we find out, and this is going to be a mess of a situation, I know it. I'm thinking of it already. If you have the decision, like I have in a couple of my leagues, where when it comes to, well, Taylor's going to miss time, Sermon's going to play, but he's a little bit banged up, do you then go with a Goodson maybe, or do you just pick them up and stash, and unless desperate, you keep them on the bench? Something to think about right there. So for those that are dealing with the Colts run game, just consider that. And if you have room on your bench right now, pick up Goodson. Don't spend too much. Don't spend much of anything, even if it's a $0 bid. Don't spend for those playing with waiver priority like it's 2001. Don't use the number 1 claim on Tyler Goodson. Don't use the number 3 or number 4 claim necessarily on Tyler Goodson, because it could just be a waste if Taylor plays. Could throw to him a little bit, but I'm interested to see what this Colts offense looks like when they have Anthony Richardson back. Forget Taylor for a second. I want to see what happens with Richardson. Matt is asking me about Josh Downs, and I do like Josh Downs. I like Josh Downs even when Josh Downs was hurt to start the year. That's why for me, even though I put in $1 on, let's say, an Alec Pierce after week number 1, because I read some reports that he would continue being the deep threat, and Adonai Mitchell, who I spent $1 my auctions on just to see if, hey, we'll see if maybe this guy can grab some target share before we see Josh Downs. I like Josh Downs a lot. I like him a lot. For DFS value, regardless who the quarterback is, I'm totally fine with that, Matt. I'm absolutely, in fact, in season long, I'm keeping him stashed on the bench, and seeing the volume that he's been getting makes me trustworthy. I wonder out there, let me ask all of you that have Colts pieces. Do you, with Joe Flacco and what you've seen with him reach some of those pieces, how do you feel about Anthony Richardson and Joe Flacco and that whole situation? Because I'm very interested, because there are times when I'm like, man, maybe you'd like Joe Flacco throw to these guys better. But at the end of the day, I still think Josh Downs is safe. For Josh Downs, and bringing this up right now as we're talking, like I said, this isn't a radio show. I do a lot of radio shows. It's more of a conversational stream. So there's going to be some lag time. 9+ targets in each of his last 3 weeks, 7+ receptions, getting in the box a couple of times too. I mean, I'm fine with that. He's a bench stash for DFS. I'm good there too. By the way, we always talk with Rich Miletto, who's not going to be joining me. Like I said, he'll be back next week. Rich does a great job, not only with players to keep on your team versus cut on fantasyguru.com, but also talks about streaming. So while I talk about streaming now, and I'm talking about the Colts, the 4 teams and Jeff Mann's rankings for the week are up at fantasyguru.com. So I picked these 4 teams, and I saw where Jeff kind of had them too. And it seems like that he is really on the money when it comes to some of these defenses that you could stream. You're looking for a streamer at this point. Colts versus Dolphins isn't bad still. It's not bad. I'm okay with that. The Rams, love the Rams if you could get them to stream against the Raiders, because at that point, with no Devontae Adams, and we haven't had Devontae Adams anyway, so is it much of a difference? They're a little bit of a mess, so I'm interested to see, and they're banged up, the Rams defense this week. Now, a couple of others that I'm into besides the Colts and the Rams. Rams as the 1 seed, by the way. The Colts are probably my 2 seed. I want to see, after seeing what the Commanders did against Arizona, and this is kind of a desperation. There's nothing else out there, but this team still is. The Commanders are my 4th seed here going up against Carolina. I think about that Arizona game, and I think they can limit the Panthers. At least in the air, I think they could do so. As for the Bengals and the Browns, the Bengals defense hasn't been good this year, but I'm fine because at this point with the Browns, sans Amari Cooper, now they're going to have to reconfigure the offense just a little bit, and I'm looking to maybe pounce on that like a Bengal would. So for me, for my streamers for defense, Rams, Colts, Bengals, Commanders. I tried to take a look on different platforms to see which defenses are somewhat available. And just so you all know that when I look on platforms, and this is how you should too, you can't take the percentages for what they are. You can't take them as face value, someone who's owned in said percentage of leagues, because a lot of leagues that are involved in that percentage are leagues that might have been formulated but are inactive, also known as dead leagues. So that's why you got to be careful. That's why when I look at waiver wire, and I would suggest waivers players for basketball and football, I'm looking for maybe a 40% or less, maybe 45% or less, giving that leeway. And that applies to 12 and 14 team leagues, because if I'm not helping you by suggesting a player that's 75% owned. It's a waste of everybody's time. And so we're not going to do that. And that's why for me, when I'm suggesting players, that's the direction I go. Now, speaking of the Panthers, Jonathan Brooks, I know that we got the report that his practice window is open. And I feel like there are a bunch of fantasy players, analysts that are infatuated with this guy, which is great. People drafted him. They stashed him. Wonder if you kept him, even if you didn't have an IR spot. But when it comes to how the Panthers' rushing attack has been in PPR leagues, by average, Chuba Hubbard is bordering the top 10. I mean, what more can you ask for this guy? He was a stopgap until, Jonathan Brooks is ready to go. But if you're the Panthers, if Hubbard is running the ball as well as he has been, some of our running backs we wish can produce on average as much as Chuba Hubbard has. On average, he's produced more than Bijan Robinson. No joke. No BS right there. How pissed off does that make you hearing that? And by the way, this was a guy who, after a couple of weeks, I found on a couple of waiver wires, and it just didn't make sense to me. Yes, I know after a couple of weeks, we're all like, wow, Bryce Young is going to run everybody into the ground. There's going to be no fantasy greatness there. Quarterback change, then the offense starts to flow with Andy Dalton. But Chuba Hubbard started to flow. And the matchups that he has had, some of them have been easy. The Raiders, easy. But at the same time, others haven't been as easy. And so he still continues to run well. 90 plus yards. 90 in 4 straight weeks. So Jonathan Brooks, they're just going to give him all those carries just like that? I mean, yeah, in theory, could they look to maybe, if they really think Jonathan Brooks, the Panthers, is their future, is their number one guy, is the guy that in 2-3 years from now, we're going to be talking about him as a potential first-round fantasy pick, maybe they trade Hubbard for assets. But he's been running the ball so well that why rush it with Brooks? Maybe with Brooks, with him being out, doesn't know the game at the NFL level yet. Maybe when he is ready to play, Jonathan Brooks gets a few carries and he's eased in. To think at this point that he's just going to be given, when he's ready to go, the entire workload, 13 to 15 carries, I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. And so with me, with Jonathan Brooks, I'm not telling you to drop him. I'm telling you that you're going to have to be patient. And if you're Chuba Hubbard, don't just sell him off low right now, because 4 or 5 weeks down the road, Jonathan Brooks could be the guy. You might not have that luxury. You probably don't. unless you have a zillion running backs and you hoarded running backs, which is totally fine. I don't poo-poo that strategy. But with the way the guy's been running, how do they just take it away from him? I just don't see it outside of him getting hurt or not being on the team. And yes, I am okay, Hal. I am okay, all right? I'm totally fine. I'm just very passionate about sports. I mean, do you want me to come and just go, yeah, Chuba Hubbard, he's been running well? No! Let's celebrate this guy. I know we're all waiting on Jonathan Brooks, but let's celebrate that Chuba Hubbard has been running the ball very well. Now has Washington. Interested to see how he does against them. The matchups aren't bad. Then they get a little bit tougher. Little bit tougher coming out of the bye, and then it gets easier again. So we'll have to see how that rolls right there. Hal also asking me about the practice reports. So hang on a second now. So the practice reports for the East Coast, yes, I thought you were asking me, do you hand it in at 3 p.m. Eastern? No, sir, no. They start rolling in, I'd say, between now and 3 p.m. Eastern. I'd say a lot of the East Coast teams by 3:30, 4 o'clock, I'd say I have about half the teams in at that point. 4 to 5, all of a sudden, it starts to accumulate even more. But then, and I try to wait it out as much as I can because I know a lot of you don't have that much time. You see the article come out, you quickly open it, you scan through it, and that's it. I hope that you read the content, but I know not everybody has a lot of time, and we put out a lot of content on the site. But that's why it's very important to me, and I'm going to start writing it in the article as a disclaimer, to please come back later in the evening because I hand it in at around, I'd say between 5:30 and 6 p.m. Eastern, or between 5 and 6 p.m. Eastern, and then I go back to it a couple of hours later. The injury report on Friday, that is a little bit more manageable when it comes to getting all the teams in. The last few weeks, outside of maybe a couple of teams, I've been able to get them all in on the first pass of sending in the injury report. And then I go back and I fill it out a little bit more at night on Friday. Then I update it on Saturday after some of the practices. I mean, we have 2 Monday night games. So that's why filling out injury reports, especially for week 7, is just mega important. And then I update it again Sunday morning, right when I get up, full football day. Right when I get up, I will update it one more time there. So I'm updating it throughout the week. It's not just posted once and then I forget about it. I take it very, very seriously. So that's how the injury report and the practice reports work. Wednesday and Thursday, a lot of those West teams are just not in on first pass through. So I'm going to write a disclaimer at the top to just make sure you check back in because I update that article a couple of hours after that. Sean's saying that it would be smart for the Panthers to keep using Chuba the rest of the season, then start Brooks in 2025. I actually agree with that. I mean, he's keeping them somewhat competitive. They've lost games, and it's not like they've been close. So I'd like to see it. Fantasy players would like to see it. But this team keeps losing. Tick-tock, they only got a couple of weeks before that trade deadline. So it'll be interesting to see if teams come in and start to offer Chuba Hubbard. He's not a valuable, because I believe one of when it comes to our Elite Mafia members here, talked about it. Chuba Hubbard, free agent. Well, that's a rental at this point for those that are looking to trade for him. But maybe there's a contending team by then in the next couple of weeks that would want to utilize him. We just saw Cam Akers get traded back to the Vikings. When I saw that happen yesterday, by the way, I did like a triple take because I thought maybe it was like a tweet from last year that's all of a sudden getting likes. I was just like shocked when I saw that. I was shocked. So that'll be interesting to see, and we'll have to watch for Minnesota. I mean, liking that line, but what's his role going to be? Because, I mean, even you could go back and look from last year. I mean, he didn't run the ball that well. That's the thing. He hasn't been that effective. And now we'll have to see what we're looking at when it comes to any kind of involvement from Cam Akers. So outside of that, that's really what we're going to be watching for when it comes to injuries, when it comes to our practice reports. Davante Adams is going to be a big one. And with Davante Adams, mean, is it a hamstring injury? Is it not a hamstring injury? From what I'm hearing right now, it's going to look like that he's going to try to play Sunday night, which I'm laughing about because that's just comedy, because you wonder if it's an injury or an injury. So that's one we'll have to wait and see, but don't get down on Garrett Wilson. I was listening to the Elite Sports Show on Sirius XM with Jeff Mans. He was talking about it yesterday with that whole scenario. And even when the trade was made, he was saying that, Garrett Wilson is still someone that could benefit. We sometimes see a stud receiver go to a team and all of a sudden we view all the other options as castaways. Well, that's not necessarily true. Drawing top coverage, Garrett Wilson might get a little bit of a break. And we know that Rodgers has a little bit of a connection with him. Is he a Rodgers guy like a Lazard or like a Devontae? No, but we know how good Garrett Wilson is. So for me, that's why I'm still in on Garrett Wilson. I'm still watching from the DFS standpoint. We don't have to worry about that, though. Sunday night, not on the main slate for the Jets offense this week. And yeah, Jets losing game after game, very close games. To someone who supports the Jets, I'll say this: Super Bowl aspirations. Should that have been the goal? Okay, you have Aaron Rodgers, former MVP, multi-time MVP champion from the past. In fact, if you really think about it, the last time that the New York Jets were in the playoffs were when they lost to the Steelers in 2010, and then it was Rodgers who beat them for that Super Bowl. It was that long ago. So for me, at the end of the day, when it came to the Jets, and as someone who's a Jets fan, just make the playoffs. Make the playoffs. Become an attractive team to incoming free agents and coaches. Okay, this team, they made the playoffs. They're back in the mix. They're on the rise. I want to go here. You have to think of this from a business standpoint. It doesn't always have to be Super Bowl or bust. Just had to get that off my chest. That's what this stream is kind of like confession for me. And it makes me feel better at the end of the day. You know what else makes me feel great when I get to see all of his content, including the triple option college stream every Friday night, 9 p.m. Eastern. It is my guest joining me now. It's Chris Rose from fantasyguru.com. Chris, it's good to talk to you, man. Thank you so much for joining me.
Let's see. What's up, man? Good afternoon. Good morning.
Yes. Good afternoon. Good morning. Good evening. Good night. Dude, I was just telling everybody that it just all blends, and you get it. You're a multi-sport analyst for the site. Do you even have a concept of time anymore? Everything just meshes together like Pangea.
Yeah, it really does. And my day job, I'm actually I'm a manager of development or a director of development for a solar company. So everything, and I have 5 kids that live in my house. So I mean, everything just blends together.
Right. Is that like a hoverboard from Back to the Future hovercraft behind you right there?
Yeah. So I have a whole bunch on this wall. I have a whole bunch of signed Michael J. Fox stuff, and yeah, that's a hoverboard back there.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Big Back to the Future guy. Just excellent. In fact, I'll say this: when I was producing radio, when it was the date that they would go into the future for the second one, October, whatever, 2015, we actually did. I was working with John Hanson at the time. We actually did a bit where we opened the show pretending we were coming off week 7 from 1985. And we had awesome. All these old school sounding like radio things from like the 80s. We had reads for like New Coke and everything like that for whatever, Radio Shack and stuff like that. We started to read and give analysis from 1985. Chris Dolman, I don't know if you remember him.
Yeah,
he was a rookie. He was a rookie back then. He called and played the part of being a rookie perfectly right there. And yeah, it was like a exact ode on the exact day for Back to the Future. And I'll say this, Chris, about Back to the Future, and then we'll get back to sports. Back to the Future, maybe the best trilogy where all 3 of the trilogy are watchable and actually likable. I would say Back to the Future might be the 1 seed in that regard.
100% agree. I went to I told Ray this a couple weeks ago. Is I went to the house, the McFly home, visiting one of my project sites in California. Went there, took pictures, and if you go to the house in California, make sure you go see the neighbor because she has like a whole guest book. She'll give you like pictures. It's crazy. Yeah, it's really cool.
Awesome. Yeah. That's great. Where is it in Cali?
It's just outside of Los Angeles. Like, I think it's just north of Glendale.
Yes, I've been to the Full House on Lombard Street in
I want
San
to do that
Francisco.
one day.
Yes, but yeah, that's awesome. See, you get useful info, and then you get destination vacations right there.
Absolutely.
Go check out the Back to the Future house. But Chris, you do a lot of GPP content, and I do a lot of cash content, especially for the NBA. We've got the season starting out in 6 days from now. Our first big slate will be a week from today. The first night is always 2 games, Knicks Celtics being one of them, but the next day, our Wednesday, is going to be a massive slate here. So we're going to be talking some GPP strategy, not only for the NBA, but for the NFL. So let's actually start with football, because we all know and love Jeff Manz's cash game breakdown. It's excellent, updated all the time, spends a lot of work on it. And you do such a great job kind of mirroring it for a GPP for those that want to play in GPPs. So I got to ask you, what are some of your GPP strategies when you're getting to write your write-up, when you're getting ready to write your write-up on a weekly basis?
Yeah, and if really nobody knows like my backstory. So I played college football. I spent 5 years playing college football, Division I. So a lot of my kind of breakdowns is more so like game theory, kind of breaking down, watching a lot of games. I watch, I have the NFL ticket, so I'll put on the 4 box and I'll watch as many games as possible. So a lot of it is just looking at it as the perspective of being inside the game, understanding like coverages and defense. That's why my quarterbacks article was real crucial earlier in the week to kind of pinpoint who you want to play in the quarterback position and then move on from there. And I do a lot of explaining in a lot of my breakdowns for each player in each position. But I think on the GPP side, it's to win GPPs, number one. This year, it seems secondary plays have been the ones that have been smash spots. If you look at, for instance, a guy like Sean Tucker, second-year running back out of Syracuse, a lot of people played Bucky Irving. Sean Tucker was the guy. If you look at it from a game standpoint, when Rachaad White was in, it was Bucky Irving getting a lot of the carries. You take White out of the scenario, and we should have thought about Tucker taking those running opportunities. So it's a secondary plays. It's leveraging against the chalk. We hear about the trains all the time. And then, of course, just emphasizing just your upside as far as, the safety and floors in GPPs and understanding where to take your risk, where not to take your risk, whether it's a value wide receiver in a good spot. One, for instance, who was high on was Trey Tucker last week for the Las Vegas Raiders, put up a 0 when he was 25-30% owned. So it's emphasizing like where to take your risk and where not to take your risk. That really makes you a good tournament or GPP player.
So I know it's early, and I know it's kind of unfair for me to ask you this at this point, but it is, again, it's Wednesday. It's not like I'm asking you 5 days before now, but just in general, are there any games that you're kind of zeroing in on for GPPs? Because naturally, a lot of us look at the spreads and the totals instantly and go, okay, this game's at 48 right now. We need some exposure here. But for GPPs, you kind of have to go in a different direction than the public. So I have to ask you, whereas maybe a lot of people are looking at Panthers Commanders, which has a 51.5 total, Seahawks Falcons 51, Lions Vikings 50. But for you, is there a game from the GPP standpoint that you like for DFS on the main slate?
Yeah, I think to get off those. So I am targeting Minnesota, Detroit. I wrote 3 out. There's 2 games that I'm really going to target, but there's one kind of off that's going to be a lower own than expected. And I am going to target Minnesota, Detroit. I'm going to target Seattle, Atlanta, because I do have 3 quarterbacks written up in those 2 games. But I think the sneaky game is Houston, Green Bay. Both of these teams have extremely powerful offenses who can score at will. I know that Houston doesn't have Nico Collins, but they do have a guy like Tank Dell who can take the top off of defense. So I think if you're going to target a game, and again, leveraging against the chalk, play some guys in this Houston-Green Bay game. Jordan Love has been a top 5 quarterback the last 2 weeks. CJ Stroud, we know what he can do. I like that game in terms of a game that you can kind of attack and maybe even game stack if you want to get off. I actually like the Houston-Green Bay game over the Seattle-Atlanta game as far as a game to target.
Wow. There you go. Hey, you know what? Again, trying to be a little bit different. That's what it comes down to. Still maybe utilizing those games, but not going after the big cheese. It's very hard to do, man, especially in football. I mean, come on. We're reading your content. We're listening to Mans all week, and we want to play those plays, and we're not saying don't play those plays, but you have to be different. When you just have to when it comes to GPPs. Trust me, Chris, when I'm writing my NBA content, there are certain players that I just want to essentially shove in the face of our audience, be like, no matter what, play it, play him. And we're going to get to a certain player in the NBA that's going to cause major waves, especially when it's ownership and are we forced to play that player? I'll tell you that in a second here. But I got to ask you now, how do you deal with players that just, and we won't have to deal with this after another few weeks, but guy like Amari Cooper changes teams now. And so I have to ask you, when that happens, how from a GPP standpoint do you react to the trade if the player is playing? Devontae Adams, a bad example, is a Sunday night game, but Amari Cooper, though, on the main slate universally. So how do you handle someone like Cooper? Will he draw automatically a ton of ownership, or will the public be a little bit skeptical being that he just joined the team?
So I think the Buffalo Bills really needed a playmaker and a route runner like Amari Cooper. We all know that he's probably a top 5 route runner in the league, even at his age. The thing about going from one team to another, Cleveland's offense is very similar to Buffalo's. The only difference is probably a little bit of verbiage. So guys like Amari Cooper, you can kind of plug and play, especially with a quarterback upgrade that you get with Josh Allen. You got guys like Mac Hollins who are catching balls for them. Keon Coleman are catching balls for them. They just released Valdez-Scantling. So that kind of makes you believe that Cooper's going to be in the lineup no matter what in this game. Is it going to be probably limited to some type of degree where he's not going to be on the field more than, I would say, 55, 60% of these snaps? Yeah, but we know how good he is. It's a pretty good matchup here. If you want, and again, going back to leveraging some of these plays where it's going to be chalky, if you play someone, I like Josh Allen this week, especially in cash games, why not play him with Amari Cooper? I mean, we played Stephon Diggs. I'm not saying that Cooper is just a Diggs mold, but I mean, it's a good spot and a good upside where we really haven't seen that upside from the Cleveland offense with Amari Cooper. Granted, Deshaun Watson's been horrendous, but I do think this is a really good upside for Amari Cooper to kind of turn his season around.
It's funny you mentioned that with the Brown side of it, because now it seems like from this trade, there's also the other side of it, Chris, because when you're looking at Cleveland now with no Amari Cooper, naturally who pops out? David Njoku, who, he's been hurt, but he was on the field nearly 75% of the snaps. So I can deal with that with a player coming back from injury, but they're on the field. Okay, that's great. Now we're expecting him to get targeted a little bit more along with Jerry Jeudy. Is that where a lot of the ownership in a situation like that for any team that's making the trade, will the DFS public flock to those players thinking that they're getting some serious value, even though half the field at least is going to be on those players?
I'll tell you what, I don't know if anybody's going to go to Cleveland with how bad they've been playing. I don't think anybody goes to Cleveland until they make the change to go to Jameis Winston, whatever that may be. I do think that this coaching staff is getting strangled a little bit by the ownership, where they can't make the switch to Jameis Winston because of the money that they've put out for Deshaun Watson. But I do think that if Cleveland makes that change to Jameis Winston, I think these guys like Njoku, Jerry Jeudy are playable. Now, remember, they also get Nick Chubb back. This offense hasn't been great on the ground. You get a guy like Nick Chubb back who gives the defense someone who can really keep guys in the box where it kind of opens up the pass down the field. We may see a different second half from Deshaun Watson. Yeah, he's been bad, but again, Jerome Ford hasn't been the answer in the running game. We'll see how much Nick Chubb has coming back from that injury, but it should help this offense. Granted, without Amari Cooper, but guys like Njoku and Jerry Jeudy should at least see some upgrades.
Well, it can't get much worse. The bar is pretty low.
It can't.
The bar is pretty low with this offense. But hey, they say they're sticking with Deshaun Watson here. Give Chris Rose, by the way, a follow on X at Chris_R1212. Again, at Chris_R1212. Chris, talking about some more when it comes to DFS and defenses. I went over a few defenses to stream for the season-long crowd before, but how do you in general in DFS, and then we can go to specifically GPPs. How do you handle DFS from this, or defenses from the strategy standpoint in DFS?
Armando and I do the same thing. We start at the bottom and work our way up. I mean, if you listen or read my articles from the first 4 weeks or up to Minnesota's bye week, I've said play Minnesota every single week. As long as they're under 3K, you play Minnesota no matter what. They have, I think it's the second highest blitz rate. And of course, like at a $2,900 price tag, they've scored over 10 fantasy points. So for me, I start at the bottom, see who has the best matchup. If there's guys out, I'll take defenses, facing guys with playmakers out. I tend to keep that as like my last box to fill, if you will, as far as my roster, just because there's so much variance in defenses where you're only looking to get 5 to 6 fantasy points on DraftKings at least, where you'll be okay as long as you don't go in the negative or 1 to 2 points.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Good strategy talk here. And that's why, Chris, we talk with you because we read all of your content, but it's also good as someone who, by the way, not only does football, but baseball and basketball. And Chris, what's your deal for basketball? Because at this point, you're still fully deep into football. Once football's over, then you start joining the basketball crew after that, correct? I believe that's how it worked last year.
I think that's how it worked last year. I may jump in here or there to write a couple articles. I do love watching basketball. I'm a big Miami Heat fan. So I still enjoy like being involved. Plus, it helps you throughout the year knowing what's going on, if there's any trades or anything, or you're following certain players. So I do like writing articles maybe 1 to 2 times a week if possible. So I don't know, you may see me pop in there, earlier than the NFL season ending.
What do you think of the Heat this year? It's weird because I feel like as a Heat fan, you have to kind of think like this isn't going to be your composition, your roster composition in a year or two from now. I don't know, man. When it comes down to guys like Tyler Hero, I just don't think he's anything more than a number 3 guy. He's young. He could still grow. I just haven't seen it. I want to see it. It just seems like with the Heat, they're kind of stuck until they figure out what they're doing with Jimmy Butler.
I think so. I think we've seen the cap on Tyler Hero. I think we know what he is. We know that you're right. He's pretty much a secondary option or a third option in that offense. I think the biggest thing for the Heat is going to be how well Kel'el Ware kind of fits into this offense. I think moving Bam from the center position to the forward position, keeping him at the 4, I think that they'll be able to stretch defense a little bit more. And I like the fact that we actually have a real center in this offense that we haven't had in a long time. Undersized Bam playing the 5. I think it'll give us a little bit more opportunities, for rebounds. I'm optimistic, but again, I think they'll end up probably between the 6th and the 8th seed in the East.
And that's because they're well coached. That's why.
Yeah.
I like Spo can take it, and Spo doesn't get the credit he deserves because he was the coach of the Heatles. And a lot of people will view him like they view Doc Rivers, unfortunately, because Doc Rivers is a horrible coach, maybe one of the worst NBA coaches of all time. He's had teams that should have gone to the championship that didn't even sniff the second round, multiple teams. He was given the original super team in Boston to win the championship. But when it comes down to good coaching with Spo, the Heat are always going to be in the mix. And they play such good defense, dude. They know how to slow them down. And that's really what they bring. And that's why I'm kind of scared of the Heat, even if you have to play them in a playoff series. So I'm kind of with you there. Last night, I was in my auction for fantasy basketball, and I've never seen a player, $200 budget in a points league, just to give you the particulars, I've never seen a player go for $84 before. Victor Wembanyama in that league, the guy he was texting me, he's like, I was going to pay whatever it took. And then he had to go dollar value most of the rest of the way. But he took Wembanyama for $84. He's put on mass. He's going to be more dominant in the lane. We saw what he could do from a block standpoint. Pop was stupid to try to play him out on the wing in that elbow area at the start instead of just having your big guy banging around inside so he can help you out more offensively. In DFS, though, man, that's going to be a decision in itself, whether you play in cash or GPPs. And this is, I'm talking, let's say we have an 8 to 10 game slate. How do we deal with Wembanyama, man? Because it just seems like he's going to be highly owned no matter the matchup every single night, unless we find out that he's capped for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest thing with Wembanyama is the peripherals, man. You mentioned it with the blocks. I think his length, be able to get steals and the rebounds. If you think about like a couple years ago with, let's just say like a Westbrook when he was going triple double almost every single night. I mean, it's guys like that where you almost have to plug and play, whether it's cash, GPPs, and get different anywhere else. Find the variance. Streaky shooters are inconsistent, but a lot of those guys can explode, and there's a lot of guys that are kind of that off-ball catching shooters that are in better positions now. Klay Thompson going over to Dallas. I mean, that's a big spot for them. A guy that Dallas desperately needed, an off-ball shooter where he doesn't need the ball in his hands. Guys like that. But Wembanyama is just, the peripherals are just overloading like his upside, and if he's not capped, it's tough to fade a guy like that who he put on 35 pounds in the offseason.
Yeah, man.
This is like the Giannis of like when he started to really develop, and it's scary how good he really can be.
Oh, Chris, let me tell you, when I was writing bets on fantasyguru.com in the betting sheets last year, a lot of the bets that I would write when I would say in the second half of the season were low center point props. And I'd attack Wemby. A lot of people would be, oh, do I bet the over 3.5 blocks for Wemby? I was attacking Wemby because he didn't guard the low block well. You had guys, the Chris Roses and the Justin Fenstermans of the world that are a zillion, feet smaller than Wembanyama, being able to box him out inside. I don't want to say I'm worried about that immediately, but he puts on 30 plus, pounds of mass. That starts to scare me a little bit. And that was what he needed to do. You mentioned it perfectly. Giannis did it, and immediately he became even a bigger force than he was. It's not going to be as easy, maybe out after the first month when he knows his strength. I'd say that it'll take a month. You're not going to be able to attack this guy anymore.
Not at all. Is he going to be capped at all? Is Pop going to cap him at all with minutes?
I don't think he's going to be capped. No, I don't think he's going to be capped. I don't think he's going to be. I mean, look, can he do a lot in 30 to 33 minutes? Yeah, but I think you could be looking at him at 35. I'm hoping, even though it's not out there, dude, because the whole Joel Embiid, him saying, or it's being suggested he's not going to play in back-to-backs for the rest of his career, which is going to cost him, 15 games automatically right there.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just, I'm hoping the same thing's not done with Wemby. But I wonder, Chris, if the Spurs aren't in that playing game mix, which do I think they could be with the growth of Wemby? I think they could be in the mix. I'm not ready to say that they'll solidly be in the play-in tournament. But if they're out of it, like they were last year at the end, that's going to really crush us, because then it's going to be, he's out. Now what? He's like Embiid. He takes up so much usage. It's really hard to find the secondary option. Obviously, he's out. You're going Tyrese Maxey. When Wemby's out, where do you go? I mean, I thought maybe it would be, Stephen Castle, the rookie, but Chris Paul's there. And you got to think Chris Paul is going to be more involved early. I don't know who that next option is for this team because of the amazingness of Wemby.
Yep, I agree.
So talking some GPP strategy. Now let's talk GPPs from your side, Chris, because how I write my write-ups are, they're very big. They're very in-depth. I write GPP specific plays. It normally has a little bit more of a cash twist on it, especially early on in the season. We have to know what we know about the skill of the player. For those that are getting ready to enter the always fun GPP world of the NBA, what are some of your strategies, kind of like you explained for football, that you implore for NBA?
Yeah, for NBA, I kind of take some of the cash game mindset, because for me, out of all the sports, I think the NBA variance is the highest. That it messes me up a little bit, because I'll think rotation-wise, and then we get late news that someone's out, and then all of a sudden I got to try to go back and rework everything. So I think having that cash game mindset, even in GPPs, and then you go like one or two guys that have that upside, and I mentioned peripherals, guys that have that, the blocks, the steals, the opportunities to get that triple-double or double-double, who can explode in GPPs. I think that's where you get a little bit different. Of course, keep that cash game consistency, but of course, include some of that GPP variance. But I think also, being in Discord, understanding that we get late news where guys get scratched or not playing late in this, or right before tip-off. So take that into consideration. I think stacking games, I think over the last couple of years, stacking games has actually been a better proponent for GPPs than of recent, where you see a lot of these GPP tournament wins are game stacking. I think you could take that in consideration. And then just going off of the contrarian plays, maybe 2 to 3 of those guys, as I mentioned with the peripherals, that can give you, that explosion of a GPP where you'll get him at 5 to 10%. But mention guys like Wembanyama. I think take the easy route, take the free square, depending on the price. Or for guys like that, I would even eat the price up to like 11K, and then just move on from there.
That'll be 2 games, and then by game 3, he'll be 11-5. That's all it's going to be. He's the most popular player in the league. The league wants him to be the next face of the league. A lot of the discussions, and we've had some major trades made. I mean, the rookie class, in my opinion, isn't anything to write. It's not 96. It's not 03 or anything like that. But when it comes to the NBA, Wembanyama has been just leading all the conversations. And considering the Spurs weren't in the mix last year, you're hearing more about Wembanyama than you are the Boston Celtics, the freaking champs. And speaking of the champs, Chris, who do you think is going to win the championship?
So, of course, I have the Celtics probably back there in the finals. But
Same.
there's two teams that I think out of the West that can be really dangerous. One being the Mavs. I mentioned the addition of Klay Thompson. I think that's a big option for them. And I think he is a guy that they needed desperately in the playoffs last year. And 2, I think it's the Thunder. I think the Thunder have such a good team core and they're deep too. I think the Thunder can really make a lot of teams frustrated and knock a lot of teams out in the playoffs. So for me, I think it's Celtics, Thunder, Celtics winning it all again.
So because Chris, I mean, I'm talking to our NBA, audience here at fantasyguru.com all summer long, trying to get in on some low futures and everything like that. You mentioned the Thunder. Dude, I was so all in before the Karl Anthony Towns trade. I was all in on Wolves Celtics in the finals. All in. You could not change my mind. That trade gets made. I immediately flip to the Thunder, thinking another year of maturity. Yep. That will help them. Getting Alex Caruso, it just sucks, man, because Josh Giddey's not a bad player, and especially for fantasy, but in reality, too, he's very scrappy. But he had to deal with some off-the-court stuff earlier in the year, and that takes a lot out of you when you're getting all the hate all year long and dealing with that kind of dark cloud and all the controversy that came with it. Now they have Alex Caruso, who, look, Caruso can give you a little bit of offense, but at the same time, Caruso is so much more mature defensively, and he's been on the Thunder before. I thought that even though it's not a big name, just a very brilliant grab, getting someone who can commit more on defense, teach your younger players like Cason Wallace how to play more effective defense. I'm freaking scared of this team. They sign Isaiah Hartenstein to $78 million. The guy might not play 18 minutes a game.
Yeah. Bringing Caruso over, who would have thought, in his years with the Lakers, what he would really turn into, the maturity, his development. I mean, I think that was a big trade. Yeah, Giddey is more of that offensive presence. I think you're going to get more offensively from Giddey than you will Caruso. But again, you mentioned it, the full roundness of his game on the defensive end, give you big shots when necessary. I mean, he is really going to be like that core guy, like that team leader that they really need for the young guys. And yeah, I loved it too. We have a group chat with a lot of the writers here with Fantasy Guru. And once that trade went down, they were like, what a smash trade for the Thunder side. Yeah, I do think that Giddey, I would have liked to seen him stay just to see what would have happened there. But again, man, that's such a great trade to really go all in here for the Thunder.
Yeah, the Bulls, that's going to be interesting. It's going to be like a Royal Rumble of who's going to get the guard minutes there, because you've got Kobe White, Ayo Dosunmu, Josh Giddey there. You also have Lonzo Ball, who he's going to be limited for a while, but he's going to play. There's a reason why they've kept him on the team and everything, and he hasn't played in 2 years. They got a lot of guards in that mix, so I'm very interested to see who ends up coming out with the most minutes of those guards between White, Dosunmu, Giddey, Lonzo Ball. Dude, that's a team with the Bulls, because you were talking about with the Heat where before as rookie you're excited about. Matas Buzelis is someone that I think the Bulls desperately need. I know Patrick Williams is your defense guy. This guy seems like in the next year or two, he could become a more complete power forward for them. And they'd get rid of Vucevic right now if they could. Nobody wants him.
No, he's turned into a liability. But the thing with Lonzo Ball, man, it's like getting a free agent coming back. 2 years haven't played. He'll be limited, like you mentioned, but if you can get him 25, 30 minutes, we don't like his dad, but the dude is a playmaker. Like, he is a baller when he's healthy, and it's a big upgrade offensively, even defensively for this team, where I think it's a great spot where you kind of progress him towards like the middle of the year, let him get like 10, 12, 15 minutes, and then all of a sudden let him free in the second half of the season where he's getting 25, 30 minutes. It's like a mid-season trade for them. Huge.
Yeah, big. And you said it, because before Lonzo Ball got hurt, now 3 seasons ago, the Bulls were a scary team defensively. Their backcourt defense was arguably the best in the league. They were way above 500 at one point. Everyone's like, what the hell? What is this? No, it was Lonzo Ball. And that's the thing. He takes a lot of heat. LaMelo too, but to a lesser extent. Lonzo took a lot of heat because of his dad, and that always made me feel bad. And, you know, you don't hate on Lonzo or LaMelo. You hate on their obnoxious dad. That's really what it is. You have to separate there. Chris, you do a lot for our site, fantasyguru.com. You cover 3 of the major sports, 3 of the 4 major sports. If you covered hockey, you'd probably be good at that too. What do you have coming up on the site over the next few days?
Yeah, so the quarterback coach came out yesterday. I started to add a couple more graphics, more graphs where you can see. There's also an algorithm on best plays as far as quarterbacks. So those are some new things that I added to the article, but I have the Mine and Marcel podcast tomorrow. I'll jump on covering the NFL slate. We have the college football live stream on Friday night. We got the college football late night article coming out, and then of course the live stream of my GPP article live stream on Saturday morning, and then my article will be out Saturday night for NFL GPP. Lots of stuff this week.
Hey, man, you know what? But it's our time. This is where winners win, and this is what we got to do to help lead that charge, man, because at the end of the day, it never stops in sports, man. You know what? There are times where we get a little bit of, I don't want to say a break, but even for someone like me, you know, the off season is a little bit easier, but you use the offseason to mentally prepare for what we're about to face now with the NBA starting, NFL still ongoing, college football. You, Scott Bonder, and Mike the Beard you all host the Triple Option podcast, 9 p.m. Eastern. I actually tune in a lot. I'm not writing in the comments section. I tune in at least for the first, I'd say 15 minutes, because here's why. It has nothing to do with your content. I just like the vibe of the stream. Because again, and I said that before, Chris, yeah, man, it's laid back. And that's what a stream is supposed to be. And I'm someone that's so used to everything being a radio show, structured radio show. I like that you guys just kind of chill out and just talk about the games, and you're very casual, calm about it. And that's one of the things that draws me in. It's a certain realism. Like, I'm hanging out at the bar with you guys, just talking it up on college football. And I think you 3 do a great job of that.
Thank you. You know what's funny is we've all been friends for probably 10 years now. George, who does Jorge Pucks, who does the hockey stuff. He does a lot of stuff for like CFL. We all went to his wedding together. I met up with Scott a couple weeks ago in New York City. I hung out with Mike over on the west coast of Florida a couple weeks ago. We're all really close friends, and I think that's the best thing about the live stream is, you know, we can make fun of each other, but also we really align as far as our sports knowledge. And if you could be laid back and really just say, well, you know, talking shit to each other and say, yeah, why do you like that guy? You're an idiot. But I think you could have like that personal touch, that friendship touch. I think it adds more to a show. And you're right. I think the structured is great, but you know, these later shows, like when it's the college football, or it's later at night, if you will, I think it adds a little bit more touch, more a personal touch that a lot of the subscribers want to see. So it's not very, I don't want to say professional, but like that corporate type.
Yeah, and that's why I like it so much. It's very authentic. And I've said this too. You know, Sandro Anello produces your stream at nights on Friday. I've said this to him 1,000 times. I just like the vibe. I'm not a huge college football guy, slowly getting a little bit more into it, but again, like I said, I like realism when it comes to this stuff. And I like that there's no, you guys are on a pedestal talking down to us. You're including us and encapsulating us into your discussion and hangout. And Chris, that's what it's all about, man. So looking forward to Friday, looking forward to your articles coming out the rest of the week and the weekend as well. And make sure you give Chris a follow on X at Chris_R1212. Chris, it's been great catching up with you, man. It's been too long, but thank you so much for stopping by.
No, as always, I appreciate being on here. Good luck to everybody. Let's get ready for NBA season and let's crush NFL this week.
For Chris Rose, I'm Justin Fensterman. Ray Flowers back tomorrow for Fantasy Sports Daily, noon Eastern, same time, same place, same channel, at the place only where the winners win. FantasyGuru.com.